Now let's take you to a story we were hoping to cover in the first hour of the show, but it's only starting now. The National Empowerment Fund and the Solidarity Fund announcing a 450 million SMME support program for businesses that can demonstrate that they were negatively impacted by the recent wave of riots in Gauteng and KwaZulu Natal. The SMME Support Programme is a first between the two organizations, which is aimed at restoring business activity in the affected areas. It will also serve as a drive to economic recovery and social stability. Let's take you there live.
Spectrum with investment funds dedicated to supporting SMEs, women-owned enterprises, rural, township and community-based businesses, medium-sized corporates, as well as potential industrial players which are financed through our strategic projects fund. So this is where we'll be doing our black industrialist projects. You may have heard about the Black Industrialist Program. So the NEF funds I have already mentioned that we actually co-finance our transactions with various partners. So you mustn't look at the 75 million rands as a limitation, because the NEF will come in just to try and de-risk the projects. So once we have invested maybe the initial 30 million or 20 million, then we'll actually invite other potential investors to come and get involved in syndicated funding or co-finance the transactions with ourselves. So some of the challenges and market failures that we have observed over the years, during which we were actually involved in providing support and working with the Black-owned enterprises. I know that it would be issues that all of you are familiar with. So the market failures that you are seeing there on this slide. So we will identify a market failure and then try and come up with a solution that will help us to try and address those particular challenges that our Black-owned enterprises are faced with. So the obvious one, of course, is the lack of access to affordable finance. So which is why we are so grateful to the Solidarity Fund for the partnership, because you'll see that their financing will come in as a grant portion. There's also lack of accurate and reliable information and lack of business planning skills. So this particular market failure can also impact on the turnaround times from our side, because if we are not in a position to provide us with all the accurate information that we will be looking for, including reliable financial projections and all of that, that is why sometimes it would actually take much longer to finalize the transaction, or sometimes you'll end up not being able to even conclude and then provide the requisite financing that would be required. There's also lack of access to local and international markets, but for this one we work closely with the DTIC because this also falls within their purview and their ambit. So sometimes they will take companies on there will be visits to other countries where they will be looking at opening markets, for some of our enterprises, especially companies that would be ready and willing to export their products to the rest of the world. There's also poor and inadequate specific industry knowledge, limited or no equity contribution. So all of these are just issues that we've been grappling with. So we're saying, as the National Empowerment Fund, that we are aware of the plight of especially the Black-owned companies, but we are trying in our small ways to try and respond to the challenges that I have just highlighted, even though we may not be able to answer to each and every market failure that I've just highlighted. Next slide is the empowerment dividend. So here on the next slide, we are saying even though the NEF places an important focus on commercial viability, our mandate also focuses on other softer measures when we assess the transactions. So these are all the measures that we look at when we assess our transactions. Obviously, the obvious one will be the BEE component in the transaction. We look at ownership, management, control, and employment equity issues. We want to see whether there is any Black women involvement in the transaction, whether there's gonna be any job creation potential as a result of that investment. So here we'll be saying, even if we invest 5 million rands, even if you tell us you're gonna create 4 or 5 jobs, it's quite a lot for us, but we just want to see that additionality in the work that we are doing, and obviously the other developmental objectives as well of our government have to be met when we do these transactions, like the key sectors of the economy, growth sectors. It doesn't mean that if your transaction doesn't fall within the sectors that have been identified within IPEP, the IPEP program that is being spearheaded by the DTIC, it doesn't mean that we will not support those transactions, but we always urge our Black enterprises to also find a way of getting involved in what we call the sectors of the future, like the renewable energy, agro-processing. We're seeing a lot of enterprises who are also involved, especially Black women-owned enterprises that are involved in the tourism space. We are also seeing a lot of transactions within the Black industrialist program that are actually driven by Black women-owned companies. Can we move to the next slide? So here we just wanted to share with you some of our key performance milestones. Just to mention that we have now approved more than 1,000 transactions that are worth 11 billion rands. And these investments have a total project value of more than 20 billion rands. So the total project value is higher than the 11 billion that I mentioned because of the co-financing arrangements that I was mentioning earlier. Over 7.5 billion has already been dispersed directly into the economy. Over 3.9 billion has been repaid by our investees. And for 18 years running, the NEF has actually secured clean external audit, which is why I believe we were chosen by the Solidarity Fund, because these are some of the other, things that they look for when they try and identify their partners. I have already spoken about the role they are playing in terms of providing support to Black-owned enterprises that want to get involved in the industrialization space. In this space, we have projects that are worth 13.2 billion rands that we have conceptualized with our various partners. So this is the area where we will take a project from pre-feasibility studies and move it to feasibility, bankable feasibility, and all the way up to financial close. So this would be like your large projects. It's not your small projects. So the good example I can share with you is a hospital group that is within the healthcare space. They approached the NEF a few years ago. So the only thing they had at the time was the license from the Department of Health. So we worked with them, invested a little bit of money. The initial funding was about 10 million. It went to 50 million. We ended up investing up to about 100 million. When it reached bankable feasibility stage and financial close, we're then able to crowd in other investors like your PICs, the Standard Bank, Eskom Pension Fund, and the value of that transaction today is estimated at around 3 billion rands. So these are some of the projects and investment opportunities that we want Black entrepreneurs to play a role in. We shouldn't just limit ourselves to SMMEs and, just remain in the periphery of the economy. So with our, the resources that we have at our disposal, we just wanted to share with you that these are some of the milestones that we've been able to achieve. And then on the next slide, these are the human capital highlights. Here we just, you can go to slide 9. So we just wanted to show you some of the sectors, the key sectors that we have invested in over a period of time. So I have already touched on the role we are playing in terms of driving the creation of new industrial capacity within the economy. There's the Black Industrialist Program, and for SMMEs, we have already disbursed over 2.1 billion into the support of 500 small and medium enterprises, township and rural economies. Here we have a dedicated fund that supports businesses in rural areas and townships. So when we were hit by, the crisis that we're trying to address at the moment, it became much easier for the NEF to hit the ground running, because it's work that we have already been doing with a lot of companies that are located in the townships and rural economies. In this sector, we have invested more than 2.1 billion, where we have supported more than 260 entities. We are also involved in property development, where we have supported the construction of malls. You may have realized that once again during the riots that a lot of these properties, malls in the townships were actually damaged, and some of them were even burnt down. So you'll find that the entrepreneurs we are working with is people that we had started working with long before we were hit by this by the crisis. Tourism, that one is self-explanatory. As I was saying, that's where we're seeing a lot of women-owned enterprises. We're doing affordable housing. We do this in partnership with, agencies of government like SHRA, and we're involved in agro-processing energy. In the energy space, we have invested over 650 million rands, where we have provided financial support to Black-owned and managed enterprises that are looking at either acquiring existing petrol stations, or people who are looking at setting up new petrol stations that never existed before. In this area, we have invested over 640 million rands. I think in total we have now supported more than 140 petrol stations. We do this in partnership with the oil majors across the country, like your BPs, your Shell, where they would come to us and say, you understand, the rural economies, the township economies better than we do. So we have then forged that new partnership with them as well. Next slide. So the achievements I have mentioned have been made possible by the fact that our organization is an academy of excellence. So when you interact with our various colleagues, we just wanted to share with you that these are some, even though we are a very small organization, but we pride ourselves on the fact that we are very agile, nimble-footed. The average age at the NEF of NEF employees is 89 years, which talks to the fact that we are indeed a maturing organization. And 60% of our employees are actually 60% are actually female. So I'm encouraging most women-owned enterprises to then try and reach out to these women who are showing a lot of dedication and commitment, to the work and the mandates of our government. Okay, can we move on? So coming to the social unrest, that was just a little bit about, the NEF. So please allow me for context to begin briefly with the work the NEF has done with the DTIC, specifically on the July 2021 social unrest. Wonga, I'm addressing Wonga from the Solidarity Fund. I just wanted to provide a bit of context before we come to the partnership we have with the Solidarity Fund. So, ladies and gentlemen, the country witnessed a spate of civil unrest in the month of July 2021 that resulted in the destruction of property and closure of many businesses in Gauteng and KwaZulu Natal. So the NEF immediately undertook an assessment of the impact of the unrest on its existing portfolio within the affected areas, because we wanted to understand how the riots had actually, impacted on our current portfolio. So among the repercussions, which everybody else is familiar with, the job losses, the closure of businesses, damage to property, and loss of stock, and all of this damage. So when the DTIC conducted their survey just to try and understand the severity of the riots, the estimated GDP loss, if I can call it that, is between 20 and 30 billion rands. So that's what we're trying to address. So I'm sure when people just woke up and decided to go on that destruction path, they didn't realize the impact, the long-lasting impact that whatever they were doing, was going to have on the livelihoods of the people who were actually affected. Some of the people have lost their jobs. So yeah, I think we are in a dire situation as a country as we speak, because all of this happened on the back of everything else that was happening around COVID. So whilst we're trying to respond and address the challenges that the companies were affected by COVID were experiencing, then we had to try and respond to this challenge that we in the crisis that we are dealing with at the moment. Next slide. So what this infographic shows is the impact of the civil unrest. Remember, I was talking about, the GDP loss, if I can call it that, but other entities are estimating it at over 50 billion rands. But when we did our own survey, so it means with the companies that the DTIC would be responsible for, we're estimating it at between 20 and 30 billion rands. So I have to say that nobody, has the correct number. These are just estimates, as I have already alluded. So approximately 3,000 stores were looted, resulting in stock losses estimated at over 1.5 billion. A total of 61 malls in both provinces, that was Gauteng and KZN. So far we're counting about 161 malls. You will understand that in order to try and reconstruct and rebuild one mall, we are looking at anything between 400 million to about 500 million. Others will even be.